Today's opening words are written by Joseph Bruchak in memory of Chief Jake Swamp, giving thanks. Thanksgiving is more than just one day, so a Mohawk elder said to me. Though it's good that we remember this time with feasting each November. We need to give thanks every dawn for the gifts of life, for each breath drawn, for everything that keeps us living. We speak our words of true thanksgiving. In that spirit, for the time we gather, let us give thanks as we worship together. Today we will light our chalice using words from the Cedar Lane Unitarian Universalist Church in Bethesda, Maryland. I will light a chalice here in my home, and you are welcome to light one in your home. Our church worship associate will also light the chalice at church. Please join me in speaking the words on your screen as we light the chalice, the symbol of our faith. We light this chalice this day in gratitude and thanksgiving for all the blessings of life, for our being in community with one another, and for that greater community of which we are a part, the whole human family, and all beings that share our planet. May this light that we serve us as a beacon of hope and love to all. May it bring warmth, healing, and peace into our lives and into the world.
Each week we gather, we carry the sorrows and celebrations of our own lives. If you have a joy or sorrow you would like to share with the group, you can type it into the chat box and I will read it aloud for all those listening. There were no joys or sorrows submitted in advance by folks from the sanctuary this week. I will begin by lighting a candle in honor of all the simple joys that are sustaining us. I will light another candle in honor of sorrows and hardships we might be carrying. Our worship associate at the church will light candles for the joys and sorrows in the sanctuary as they are read. I will light one more candle in honor of the joys and sorrows we carry in our hearts, but have not been spoken aloud. We will share a moment of silence together. Some of us with experience that silence as a time of prayer and some as a time of meditation, and some simply as a time to honor what has been said and left unsaid. I invite you into a silence of your understanding, holding our own lives and the world in our hearts. Thank you.
A Chinook Blessing Litany. We call upon the earth, our planet home with its beautiful depths and soaring heights, its vitality and abundance of life. And together we ask that it open our hearts and show us the way. We call upon the mountains, the high green valleys and meadows filled with flowers, the snows that never melt, the summits of intense silence. And we ask that they open our hearts and show us the way. We call upon the waters that rim the earth, horizon to horizon, that flow in our rivers and streams, that fall upon our gardens and fields. And we ask that they open our hearts and show us the way. We call upon the land which grows our food, the nurturing soil, the fertile fields, the abundant gardens and orchards, and we ask that they open our hearts and show us the way. We call upon the forests, the great trees reaching strongly to the sky with earth in their roots and the heavens in their branches, the fir and the pine and the cedar, we ask them to
Open our hearts and show us the way.
We call upon the creatures of the fields and forests and the seas, our brothers and sisters, the wolves and deer, the eagle and dove, the great whales and the dolphin, the beautiful orca and salmon who share our Northwest home. And we ask them to
Open our hearts and show us the way.
We call upon all those who have lived on this earth, our ancestors and our friends, who dreamed the best for future generations and upon whose lives our lives are built. And with thanksgiving, we ask them to
Open our hearts and show us the way.
And lastly, we call upon all that we hold most sacred, the presence and the power of the great spirit of love and truth, which flows through all the universe, to be with us to
Open our hearts and show us the way.
Today, I'm going to be reading from a book that is based on the Thanksgiving address, an ancient message of peace and appreciation of Mother Earth and all her inhabitants, traditionally taught to the Iroquois children as a way to start each day. Giving thanks, a Native American good morning message by Chief Jake Swamp. To be a human being is an honor, and we offer thanksgiving for all the gifts of life. Mother Earth, we thank you for giving us everything we need. Thank you, deep blue waters around Mother Earth, for you are the force that takes thirst away from all living things. We give thanks to green grasses that feel good against our bare feet, for the cooler beauty you bring to Mother Earth's floor. Thank you, good foods from Mother Earth, our life sustainers, for making us happy when we're hungry. Fruits and berries, we thank you for your color and sweetness. We are all thankful to good medicine herbs for healing us when we are sick. Thank you, all the animals in the world, for keeping our precious forests clean. All the trees in the world, we're thankful for the shade and warmth you give us. Thank you, all the birds in the world, for singing your beautiful songs for all to enjoy. We give thanks to you, gentle four winds, for bringing clean air for us to breathe from the four directions. Thank you, Grandfather Thunder Beings, for bringing rains to help all living things grow. Elder Brother Sun, we send thanks for shining your light and warming Mother Earth. Thank you, Grandmother Moon, for growing full every month to light the darkness for children and the sparkling waters. We give you thanks, twinkling stars, for making the night sky so beautiful and for sprinkling morning dewdrops on the plants. Spirit protectors of our past and present, we thank you for showing us ways to live in peace and harmony with one another. And most of all, thank you, Great Spirit, for giving us all these wonderful gifts so we will be happy and healthy every day and every night.
I'd love to have you reading me a story every night, Sam. Nice memories. We agreed to call our presentation Gratitude for Who We Are and Where We Come From. The first natural question then is, who are we and what is our American culture? We seem to have taken a little from all the different nationalities and their cultures as they have been absorbed into the fabric of our American mix. We in fact take some pride in our multiculturalism. Are there distortions or misinformation in our collective memory that underlies this cobbled culture of ours? I was raised by a mother who was a reader and a thinker, and I'm forever grateful to her for cultivating my insatiable curiosity. Among her many interests and concerns, she was deeply distressed about the conditions for the American Indian. And as I grew up and read and asked questions, I came to understand her concerns and add more of my own. If they are truly descendants of the first human inhabitants of our continent, how can it be that they seem to be our least valued and understood? Most people don't seem to know that November is Native American Heritage Month, or that November 23rd, known to most as Black Friday for great deals and shopping frenzies, is Native American Heritage Day. And even if they do, it's hard to tell if many commemorate it. How did this happen? And what does this say about who we are as a nation? I did warn you that I am insatiably curious, and I am filled with lots of questions. Today, more than ever, we seem to value and search for truth. As we planned this service, we felt that it was important to take a closer look at where the Thanksgiving holiday truly came from and what it has become, as well as what it can be. Historically, it has been linked to the Pilgrims and Native Americans. As we read and worked with the topic, it was clear that the story had been whitewashed, and that pun is definitely intended, and that the American Indians deserved to have their true part in the story told. So let's begin with the traditional Thanksgiving story we learned as kids. In 1620, the Pilgrims fled harsh religious suppression in Britain, sailed across the Atlantic in their ship, the Mayflower, and in December stepped ashore at Plymouth Rock in what is now Massachusetts. With little food and no shelter, the colonists struggled to survive a brutal winter until a friendly Indian, Squanto, came along and showed them how to cultivate crops. Their first harvest resulted in a feast, as the Pilgrims gave thanks to the kind Indians for helping to bring the colony back to life. Then the Indians moved on, so the Pilgrims could create a great nation dedicated to liberty, opportunity, and Christianity. There are threads of basic truth in this story so far as it goes, but there is so much more that is not commonly talked about. We would like to briefly explore more deeply what really happened, realizing that we have to draw from stories that have passed down through generations, understanding that no one story is all true or all right, but hoping to get a little closer to what probably happened. It is not our intent to place blame or shame, but to expand our awareness and understanding. James W. Lowen said it best: the antidote of feel-good history is not feel-bad history, but honest and inclusive history. If many Native Americans call our current holiday of Thanksgiving a national day of mourning, and point out that it marks the beginning of centuries of oppression and attempted genocide of the American Indian, it makes sense to see where those feelings come from. A first important step is to refer to the Native people by their tribe names, rather than as a generic Indians, as presented in our traditional story. Pardon me. There are nearly 600 federally recognized Indian nations across the United States. They each have their own cultures, languages, dress, histories, styles of homes, and spiritual practices, and they prefer to be called by the name of their tribe. The tribe the Pilgrims met in 1620 was the Wampanoag. They were a nation made up of 69 villages scattered throughout present-day Rhode Island and Massachusetts. Another important fact is that the history of the Native people began long before the Europeans arrived. People had already lived in the Americas for at least 12,000 years. And according to some Native traditions, since the beginning of time. Having the history of our country start with the English is a way of dismissing all of that. Are we saying only some people's history matters? For many, there's a sense that the arrival of the Mayflower was some kind of first contact experience. I'm sorry, excuse me. There are stories in various written forms that date back to the 1500s about Europeans in the New World. The Wampanoags had contact with European voyagers intermittently, starting in at least 1524, years before the Pilgrims arrived. The Europeans brought with them the illnesses of their homeland. American Indians had no immunity to these diseases and died at alarming rates. It is estimated that 90% of America's indigenous people perished as a result of the arrival of the Europeans. The Europeans also abducted American Indians for sale in the slave trade in Europe. Squanto, that Indian most often mentioned in our traditional story, was kidnapped in 1614 and taken to Spain to be sold as a slave. He was saved by a group of Spanish friars who blocked his sale, honoring the Spanish law that said Native Americans should not be enslaved. They taught him building skills and provided a safe home. While with the friars, Tisquantum, that's Squanto's true name, met some English merchants who took him to London, where he learned English and learned to build ships. Eventually, he worked his way back to his homeland in 1619. When he returned, his village was gone, and most of the villagers were dead. He remained using his building skills and his knowledge of English language until the Pilgrims arrived. He and others of his tribe did help the Pilgrims learn about hunting and farming in their new home. How about the idea of the Indians being friendly and welcoming to the Pilgrims? This is somewhat true, but it was because so many of the Wampanoags had died due to the illnesses that they were hoping the colonists would help them fight off the neighboring tribes that threatened to overtake them. As for the natives that were allegedly invited guests at the first celebratory feast, they actually came to investigate to be sure the colonists weren't preparing to attack them, and ended up staying to keep an eye on them. They did hunt and share food with the colonists, but not for the reasons suggested in that traditional story. The Thanksgiving feast was not just the idea of the colonists. Like indigenous groups everywhere, the Wampanoag had a deeply spiritual relationship with nature and believed that as long as they gave thanks to the bountiful world, it would give back to them. Long before the arrival of the Pilgrims, the Wampanoag held frequent Thanksgiving-like celebrations, giving thanks in the form of feast and ceremony. There is a great deal more that can be shared on all these topics and more, but we'll stop there in the interest of time. These facts are widely known to the Native American communities across the United States. Given what we've shared with you, it is not hard to understand why some Indian Americans view the celebration of Thanksgiving as a form of continuing disrespect and dismissal of their contribution and place in what is now the United States of America, and a complete failure to recognize the massacre of Native populations and the slave trade that swept through their villages.
The feelings expressed about the holiday of Thanksgiving by Native peoples vary widely. They range from not celebrating the holiday, all to sharing with family and community meals, and then attending powwows and family dances. Here's a sampling of what we found. From Alet, Virginia. It is good to celebrate the concept of gratitude and thankfulness. When the holiday story is based on a lie that covers up the national moral atrocity of genocide, the statement about the people who celebrate is not good. Shining light on the truth will always bring about healing. And from Webster, Massachusetts, another Native American says, in Massachusetts, we celebrate the fall harvest, which we call Harvest Moon Feast. It is something our Eastern tribes have done since the beginning of time. We get together and give thanks for the harvest, family, and friends, and is something we enjoy. The Thanksgiving narrative, however, is problematic on many fronts and can be justifiably referred to as the day of mourning. From Minneapolis, Minnesota. Maybe we celebrate, after all that has happened to our Native people, that we are still here. We still have our songs and dances and our ceremonies that make us who we are. From Hydro, Oklahoma, could we just start over and go forward? We can't change the past, but we can work for peace and unity in the future. History needs to be taught correctly in our schools. That is what needs to happen. My daughter had to write a paper about Big Tree, Satank, also known as Sitting Bear, and Satanta, leaders of the Kiowa tribe of Oklahoma in the 1860s. They went on to lead raids into Texas. My daughter interviewed Satanta's great-grandson, who was in his 90s, and told the story as he told it to her, including their transport from Fort Sill, an army post in southwestern Oklahoma, and how the feather was turned into a knife as they passed the giant tree, causing soldiers to shoot and kill Satank. My daughter got an A+ from her teacher. From Salt Lake City, Utah. Thanksgiving to me is to be grateful for all the good blessings that came my way. Good health, gift of family. Regardless of history, there are still many natives in the land, and that shows how resilient we are. To honor those who went before us, let us share our culture and stories, teach the youth to learn from the past, and make our lives so our ancestors are proud of us. Example is a great educator. And finally, from Plymouth, Massachusetts. As a concept, a heartfelt Thanksgiving is very important to me as a person. It's important that we give thanks. For me, it's a state of being. You want to live in a state of thanksgiving, meaning that you use the creativity that the Creator gave you. You use your talents. You find out what those are and you cultivate them. And that becomes thanks in action.
Traverse to Sioux. These words were familiar to me from my childhood days growing up in St. Peter, Minnesota. In time, I would also learn of other historic choices that would open my heart and mind to what I thought I already knew. Traverse to Sioux, to me, was a park north of town where we had family picnics, and later as we grew older, where we would hang out. I remember the log cabin that was built there and wondered how anyone could live in a place like that. Close to the cabin was a huge boulder that, from my 70-year recollection, was perfect for climbing. But like most kids and maybe adults too, I hadn't paid much attention to its plaque commemorating the treaty with the Dakota Native Indians. Here was a landmark that had revived so many earlier memories, and yet the specifics and meaning of the treaty were muddled. Researching, I learned that Traverse des Sioux was a place where the Dakota tribes could cross the shallow river. It was also where they gathered before going out to hunt. Historically, it was where the Dakotas signed the Traverse des Sioux Treaty in July of 1851. This was a treaty between the Dakota tribes and the US government that addressed the growing white population, land, and stipulations from an earlier treaty which provided provisions for the Dakota people. A number of years later, my husband Shep and I had returned to live in Minnesota and decided to take family visitors to New Ulm and tour the August Shell Brewery. Not only was that beer good, but the tour guide was extremely knowledgeable. His comments are ones I remember to this day. He told us how the Shell family members had befriended the Dakota over the years and speculated that this hospitality was probably the reason the brewery and the grounds had been spared destruction during the Dakota War of 1862. What I didn't realize was that the US government did not uphold the terms of the Traverse des Sioux Treaty. The dishonest and inexcusable injustice actually caused the Dakota War. The uprising was one of the most violent ethnic conflicts to antagonize the nation. As Gary Clayton Anderson states in his book, Massacre in Minnesota, the horrors of wholesale violence have long obscured what really happened in Minnesota in 1862, resulting in consequences which reverberate to this day. What was the connection between the Traverse des Sioux Treaty and the Shell Brewery? During the 10 years between the signing of the treaty and the outbreak of the war, the population was growing with immigrants establishing homesteads in the area. August Shell was one of those immigrants. In 1860, he and his partners started the brewery along the picturesque Cottonwood River, just west of New Ulm. Meanwhile, Norwegian and Swedish immigrants were also settling into the areas of Northland and New Sweden and remain culturally distinct to this day. When the US government broke its promises to the Dakota people, they were stripped of most of their land. They were forced to become more and more dependent on established government agencies to provide them with food and supplies. Our government did not honor the provisions of the treaty, and the Dakota were forced to go without. By 1862, families were starving and in dire need of help. They wrote letters demanding food, provisions, and annuity payments that had been promised by the treaty. Letters went unanswered. The Dakota were abandoned. That was it. The Dakota had reached the proverbial end of the rope. In retaliation, Chief Little Crow organized bands of Dakota warriors to attack the agency and other settlements in the area. War broke out. To avoid the confrontations, most of the settlers chose to leave their properties and land and to move to larger towns for safety. Among those were family members of the Shells and the Anderson families from the Northland area. After the war, the Shell family returned to their brewery and were amazed. They discovered that their property had not been damaged or looted. August Shell reported that he could tell that the Dakota had been in his home, but that nothing had been taken. The Anderson family, immigrants who had fled for safety, returned to the Northland area and found their home and barn intact. And they discovered that the Dakota had fed the Andersons' barn animals. What did these two families have in common? The Shell family had always welcomed curious tribal members who came to look at their property, being quick to provide the visitors with food and good German hospitality. The families from Northfield area reported that kinships had developed between the immigrants and the Native Americans. Cross-cultural roles developed, and from personal experience with the people of the Northfield area, I can't help but think that a bit of Scandinavian hospitality went into that too. The myths that I grew up with in the 40s and 50s, as portrayed in the cowboys and Indian movies, the good guys and the bad guys, were just that, myths. Now we are beginning to see the facts. We know for sure that during those 10 years, many choices were made. Some respectful, others not. In the case of the Shell family and the Anderson families, and probably many more, we've learned something about human behavior. Acts shared from the heart are returned in kind. We may never know the influence that our kindnesses to another person might have. But as a quote that I have in my office states, if you think you're too small to be effective, you've never been in bed with a mosquito. So may our hearts lead us to the right and honorable choices.
What is truly remarkable, considering the myths and the misunderstandings that have surrounded the indigenous tribes, as well as the fatal diseases, slave trade, and outright attempts at genocide, they are still here. Their resilience is a testimony to their ability to survive and in some ways thrive. Among many traits, one that has served them well is their lightheartedness. Cynthia Lindquist, a Spirit Lake Dakota and Tribal College president, had this to say about the significance of Native humor. Laughter has always been a part of being Indian, and Native humor is culturally distinct and complex. Indigenous languages and storytelling are integral to the cultural uniqueness of Indian humor. Indian humor is unique, and as such, it is the heart of our resilience and survivability. Moral lessons and social order are embedded in storytelling, especially in trickster stories. Teasing someone is a way to point out that they might not be in step with tribal opinion or cultural norms. Natives like to make fun of themselves and to not take themselves too seriously. Humor is a way to understand and heal from personal or historic trauma, as well as a way to fight adversity. Today's Native artists, playwrights, and comedians bring attention and focus to stereotypes and many serious issues in Indian country. Humor and laughing are educational and help them to foster understanding and change by making them think about and see the world in a new way. Last Thursday, there was a gathering at Coles Hill in Plymouth, Massachusetts, the place where the Pilgrims first stepped onto their new world. Many Native Americans have been gathering there ever since 1970. This is the official site of the National Day of Mourning. It started when Frank James, native name Wamsutta, had his speaking invitation rescinded from a state celebration commemorating the 350th anniversary of the landing of the Mayflower. After the committee reviewed what Mr. James planned to say, he was informed that he would not be permitted to speak. He intended to tell the truth about all the negative aspects of the first Thanksgiving story and the years surrounding. Rather than give up, Mr. James and a number of other Native leaders quickly put together an event in Plymouth to draw national attention to the injustices faced by tribes in the eastern states. Close to 500 Native Americans from around the country came to hear Frank's speech. And every year since, people gather to remember and to dispel myths surrounding the Thanksgiving story and raise awareness toward historical and ongoing struggles facing the Native American tribes. Our intention, again, is not to place blame or shame or ruin what is a lovely holiday shared by family and friends. As we heard, Native Americans themselves wholeheartedly support a National Day of Thanks. We do need to stop retelling the myths around the Pilgrims and the Native tribes. And perhaps we can add an extra bit to our celebrations to take a moment to remember what has happened to the Indigenous peoples of our country and mourn their losses and pay homage to all that they have contributed to our American culture. The words in the song you are about to hear are, I have to get it right, Weandeahu. They mean, I am the Great Spirit. It is so. It stems from ancient Cherokee. The singers are Rita Coolidge and her sister Priscilla Coolidge and her daughter Laura Satterfield. They call themselves Walela, the Cherokee word for hummingbird.
We turn our attention now to the wider world as we take our offertory. Half of the money donated today will go to Honor the Earth. Honor the Earth uses Indigenous wisdom, music, art, and the media to raise awareness and support for Indigenous environmental issues. They leverage this awareness and support to develop financial and political capital for Indigenous struggles for land and life. For more information on this organization, please go to honorearth.org. You may contribute right now online by going to our website, uunorthfield.org, clicking on the yellow donate button on the right-hand column, and then selecting Share the Plate. Or you can mail a check made payable to UUFN with offering basket written on the memo line and send it to UUFN, Post Office Box 363, Northfield, Minnesota 55057. Separate checks marked UUFN Pledge are also welcome. If you are at our church building, please put cash or check, again made out to UUFN with offering basket on the memo line, and place it in the collection basket. As always, thank you for giving as you are able. And now, please join us in singing or humming our final hymn, Spirit of Life. Our closing words are based on a Mohawk prayer with gratitude. We give gratitude to Mother Earth, to plants, to air, to wild beings, to water, and to the sun. We give gratitude to the great sky who holds billions of stars, and with powers beyond our thoughts is yet within each of us. We go forth into our day with gratitude, with blessings and peace. Please join me as we extinguish our chalice here and in your homes. The words were written by Reverend Scott Taylor, titled, "For the Memory That Heals and Holds." You will see the words on your screen. We extinguish this chalice in honor of the history that holds and heals us, for the stories of heroism that inspire our own, for the faces of loved ones who have passed, in whose images we see our better selves, for reminders of those who paved the path on which we travel and blessed us with advantages we didn't earn all on our own. These memories do not live in the past. They carve the contours of our present. They throw themselves into our futures and lure us into building a life better for all. They are here today. Look, listen, let them in. May their light guide our way. Go in peace.